No, it's not really. I'm going to show you what I'm going to mark Exhibit 20. This is a certified copy from the clerk's office, and I would like to enter it into the record. Under RISMO 49240 and request the official notice to be taken. But I have to offer that exhibit. I'm going to use it.
Mr. Jensen?
No objection.
You never cut corners.
Don't believe so.
You're offended by the idea of being biased.
Yes, sir.
You would enforce every ordinance that the city has.
In what manner?
As a police officer, you would enforce every ordinance that the city has.
In what respect? You mean,
Would you not enforce an ordinance?
there are times whenever we have discretion as to enforcing ordinances, if that's,
If you knew there was an ordinance, you would be obligated to enforce it because it's under the law unless you had discretion, I guess you're right. You could, I see, understand what you're saying. If you were to go, you could, someone had a traffic ticket, you could let them blow the day.
yes, sir.
If there was a code provision outside of that that told you what to do, you would follow it. If it was an internal affairs code, wouldn't you?
Yes, sir, I believe so. I guess I'm not sure I follow.
It was your job to know the internal affairs, policies, and procedures in police officers' rights. Isn't that right?
Yes.
Can I ask you to speak up a little?
Oh, yeah, sorry. My voice is found. I can't. That's what broke. I apologize. What's marked at Exhibit 20, if you look at subsection 2, and can you read that to us?
This section that starts the police officer?
Yes.
The police officer may have an attorney or Columbia Police Officer Association representative present during the officer's interview to observe the interview.
And Scott was there for the interview.
Yes, sir.
And what does observe mean to you?
For his part, to watch the interview.
And nothing else?
Correct. And I believe at the time what we were doing was, the goal was for attorneys to observe the interview, and then if they had something to add at the end, that they could add that at the end. Yes, sir.
But 26 times he didn't just observe. Isn't that correct?
I don't recall, sir.
Would you like me to go get your transcript so I can show you all 26 times? Let me ask you this. Do you remember him objecting at the beginning?
It's possible, but I don't. I remember him objecting at one point in particular, yes, sir.
Do you remember him asking questions at the end?
I don't remember that right off.
We'll go.
Yes.
We'll go through it. This is your original file. You'll go to the Sanders
Yes, sir.
interview. Let's take a look at 534, the number.
Line 534.
Yeah, line 534. Start at 502. Let's do that. The row two.
Yes, sir.
What's 502 say?
Looks like it is a part of
Maybe
Officer Sanders' answer.
well, let me take a look. Maybe my numbers are. I apologize.
Mr. Noyes, what are you looking at right now?
This is the internal affairs investigator.
What are you asking him to look at?
This is a transcript of his interview with Officer Sanders
Okay.
and
With Mr. Jensen
with
present.
Mr. Jensen, present. sorry, there's multiple 500s. There's 4 sections to some. Is there 4 sections?
I would have to look at it.
Okay, let's just get you the right, I'll get you the right. So here at 497, what's that?
It looks like a part of the interview where Mr. Jansen was saying something during the interview.
What about 502?
Yes, again, where Mr. Jansen was saying something.
512,
Same thing.
516,
Yes,
521,
yes,
526,
yes,
530,
yes,
554.
yes.
Do you believe me there's 26 times?
I have no reason to doubt that. Yes, sir.
So you didn't enforce that ordinance. You never even asked them to stop. Is that correct?
If it's not in the transcript, I may not have.
It's not.
Either I didn't or Sergeant Simons did not.
You're the internal affairs expert, and that's the ordinance on internal affairs, and you didn't even enforce that basic ordinance.
We wouldn't necessarily always shut down an attorney if they had something to add. Maybe we should have been more strict about that, but I can't think of another instance where that happened, but I also can't think of another instance where if an attorney spoke up that we would immediately shut them down and say, you'll have your chance to speak later.
But that's what the ordinance says.
Yes.
How much time did the officers have in deciding on when to enter the cell?
If you're asking minute-wise, second-wise, I would have to review the video. I could estimate, but
Can you ask, let me ask you this. It was not a rapidly evolving situation. Is that true?
with regards to their decision to enter the cell, that particular point, maybe not, no, sir.
Matter of fact, they had to wait for the next bang in the door. Do you remember that?
Yes, sir.
And it took a while. It wasn't immediate.
Correct.
Certainly wasn't rapidly evolving.
That particular section, no, sir.
Okay. Did you allow Rob Sanders to take breaks when he was with his attorney during their interviews?
I believe it was a fairly long interview, so I believe we did take breaks, restroom breaks and whatnot.
If you take a quick check, I think there's 4 sections, and I think you got 4 breaks. Does that sound right?
It's very possible.
3 breaks, maybe?
Very possible.
At any time you were in internal affairs, did you supervise anyone?
No, not really.
And you knew you did not have the power to fire anybody, is that correct?
Correct.
And all you do as internal affairs is you do your very best job and you make a recommendation, is that true?
Yes, sir.
But it's not mandatory that that is followed,
No, sir.
and it wasn't in this case.
No, sir.
And were you aware that 3 other commanding officers also didn't follow that recommendation?
I found that out later, yes, sir.
And they sustained 2 of the charges.
Yes, I believe so.
Do you remember which 2 they were?
Which 2 charges?
Yeah.
I don't.
It was abusive and improper treatment of a prisoner, and it was the reasonable use of force, or
Okay.
reverse is the way it's
Okay.
written. So it wasn't just the chief that said, no, I don't like this. There was at least 3 other people in the chain of command, isn't that correct?
I believe so.
And if it wasn't the case that you made a recommendation, then we wouldn't need a chain of command and a final decision maker, would we? You guys had the last word.
If we make a decision?
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
So we agree that all claims that IA's review was binding on the chief were false and misleading.
Can you repeat that?
Yeah, sure. So we agree that all claims that the IA review is binding on the chief are basically false and misleading.
That our recommendation is binding?
Yeah.
That's not correct.
Right, so that's false and misleading statement.
I suppose it's an incorrect statement.
It's untrue. Okay. Let's talk about your role in the Internal Affairs Division as a detective. You viewed the video of the incident and the supplement made by Rob Sanders, is that right?
Yes, sir.
And you had both of those when you were assigned the report in August, isn't that right?
Yes, sir.
So what witness statements were left to be found?
With regards to the investigation,
Yeah, why would you go back and re-interview all the witnesses when you had all their original reports?
it was just, that was the way things were done at the time. We would review a statement, we might interview them about the entire thing, or we might just go through a report and say, okay, we have a question about this needs to be clarified, and then ask that clarifying question. So it just kind of depended.
I mean, you don't believe that officers lie in their reports, I'm sure.
No, sir.
But there was an interview you were with Krista where you talked to Sergeant Houston. Do you remember that?
Yes, sir.
Tell me about that interview.
If I remember correctly, Sergeant Houston may have done a supplement to the report, and so we were interviewing him about his report.
And was it about that in Sergeant Houston's report, he had said that Sanders had told him that Baker had taken a step forward or
I
towards him?
believe there was something to that effect. Yes, sir.
And was it true that Krista kept asking him, is that right? Or the report is still open, I think she even says.
I don't know, I would have to either listen to the audio of the recording or view a transcript.
Is all the transcripts that you did and all the things that you have are in that IA file, right?
I would assume so. This has not been in my possession for a long time.
I'm not gonna make copies of this one, but I'm gonna mark this as Exhibit 35. Will you go through it and see if you recognize all that material in there and that that's the file?
You mean with regards to the interview with Sergeant Houston?
No,
or
just
you
the
mean-
whole file, just the whole file.
You want me to go through the table of contents and review
Just-
each tab?
How about go through it enough to where you believe that this is the real file? If that's just right now, it's okay. I mean, if you've seen it before and you know that's the real file, I'm okay.
It appears to be.
And you made this file in the ordinary course of business?
Yes, sir.
And you made it when you were reasonably, when these events were happening?
Yes, sir.
I'm gonna mark this as 35, so you guys can see as much of this as you want. Just put it on the front.
Mr. Jansen, you fine with that?
Sure.
So what witness statements were, oh, sorry, excuse me, I apologize. I suppose it would be important to hear the other person's side of the story.
Yes, sir.
And that person obviously would be the prisoner, Mr. Baker.
Yes, sir.
And you never talked to Mr. Baker.
No, I attempted to, and his attorney declined to bring his client to him.
In fact, you told his attorney that he would have to be arrested to speak with you. Isn't that correct?
I don't remember that particular point.
Do you recognize this email?
Yes, sir. It appears to be the email correspondence with Mr. Nedemeyer, who would be Mr. Baker's attorney.
Can you read that into the record for us?
Do you want me to read the?
Read let's do this. Why don't you just read the text, not the top or the very bottom?
Mr. Nedemeyer, I'm a sergeant with the Columbia Police Department's Internal Affairs Unit. I'm participating in an investigation into the actions of officers that involved your client, Kenneth L. Baker, on the evening of August 15, 2011. we would like to conduct an interview with Mr. Baker about the events that occurred on that day. As you're probably aware, Mr. Baker currently has 2 outstanding warrants for his arrest. Also related to the events of August 15th are warrant requests on charges of assault of a law enforcement officer, in parentheses 2 counts of third-degree assault, and a felony charge of resisting arrest had been submitted to the Boone County Prosecuting Attorney's Office for its consideration. Of course, if you are agreeable to Mr. Baker coming in to speak with us, he would need to have the warrants addressed, in parentheses recalled or otherwise served, by the time we conduct the interview. If he prefers, we could make arrangements for the interview and he could turn himself in on the warrants at the same time he appears for the interview. Following the interview, we could have him processed and transported to Boone County so he could post bond. Please know, however, that if Mr. Baker has contact with law enforcement prior to that, he will be taken into custody if the warrants are active. I've checked with my supervisors and they have agreed we will forego arresting Mr. Baker on the charges for which probable cause was established on the night of his arrest, in parentheses, 2 counts of assault on a law enforcement officer and the count of resisting arrest. We would allow those charges to proceed as warrant requests and let the prosecutor decide whether or not to issue a warrant for Mr. Baker. Please contact me and let me know if you would be agreeable to an interview with your client. Thank you in advance for your consideration in this matter. Respectfully, Sergeant Jason Jones.
So you weren't under an obligation to arrest him if he came in to talk to you, isn't that true?
Well, one of the things that I prefaced it with is he would need to have the warrants addressed, recalled, or otherwise served by the time we conducted the interview. So that was one of the options. The other option was that if he had a warrant, that we would have to arrest him. But we would forego arresting him on the resisting arrest and assault law enforcement charge.
The other charges were forwarded to the prosecuting attorney. Were those charges filed?
Some of the charges were, I don't know, at this point in time, I don't recall exactly what charges were filed by the Boone County Prosecuting Attorney's Office.
The 2 counts of assault on a law enforcement officer and the 1 count of resisting arrest, you don't know whether those charges ever got even filed?
I do, I remember, if I remember correctly, I believe some of the charges were filed, but I don't remember off the top of my head.
Would that have been in your investigation report?
It's possible.
Should it have been in your investigation report?
It's possible that it happened after the conclusion of the investigation.
Did you think about asking his attorney to submit a written statement?
No, I don't believe I did.
Did you think about asking him to submit a written statement?
Asking the attorney?
No, just Baker.
I believe we tried to get a hold of Mr. Baker, but no, we didn't have any contact with Mr. Baker, as I recall.
Could you have arranged with the attorney for Mr. Baker to have talked to you on the phone?
It's possible.
But you didn't try either of those 2 things, is that correct?
We don't typically interview people over the phone. We typically try to interview people in person.
But you do take written statements,
Yes, sir.
and you never offered him that.
I don't believe I did. I could have.
And you didn't obtain Baker's medical records, is that true?
I don't recall having done
I don't believe there's in the Baker's medical records in your report. Did that surprise you?
it. I don't recall doing it, so no.
Did you try to get his medical records from the hospital?
No, I wouldn't have tried to do that without a consent.
Did you? You don't remember trying to get his medical records from his attorney?
No, sir.
But you were assigned specifically to review whether or not Mr. Baker was given proper medical care and treatment, correct?
Yes, sir.
When those medical records have been useful?
I don't object to the relevancy of it. I don't understand what Mr. Baker's medical records after the incident would have to do with whether Rob called the medics who took him to the hospital.
Shouldn't it have to do with how he was hurt and if he was hurt and what kind of things were happening as he's laying in the cell? In the chief's theory of this is something we would never do to let someone lay there, should you at least investigate it?
I'm not sure it would, to tell you the truth. I mean, we know he had a laceration on the back of his head laying in the cell.
And
What do you expect to gain beyond that?
well, there was also in his report, it talked about he had possibly a fracture, but they didn't know where it came from.
And I don't think the medical records would have known that either. From what I heard somebody testify earlier is that it could well have happened during the initial fight.
But we never even bothered to go investigate to find out.
So what's your point?
My point is that where's all this investigation of these charges?
Okay, your point is he did a bad investigation, right? Is that what you're trying to say?
My point is he could have done a better investigation.
Agree. You'll probably agree with that.
Could
Would
you
you
have
agree
done
with that,
a
sir?
better
In
investigation?
hindsight, yes, sir, I can think of a couple of things that I could have done better, yes, sir.
You're a supervisor now, is
Yes,
that
sir.
true? Is there a different view for you in hindsight as a supervisor looking back on this than when you were in the trenches in internal affairs?
In what respect?
Into Rob Sanders' actual actions?
As to what I changed my opinion of the findings?
Do you feel differently about
I don't know how to answer that. I guess I don't know. I don't understand the
Okay,
question.
let me ask you this. If you were in the exact same situation, with the exact same facts, would you have shoved shoved Baker like that and launched his head into the wall?
So if I was in Rob Sanders' position at that time,
Mhm.
that's hard for me to say sitting here. Would I have shoved him at that particular moment? Would I have shoved him 10 seconds earlier when he was bent over? It's hard to say.
You might have tried other options, though.
It's possible, yes, sir.
You might have started out trying to get him a glass of water.
Yes, anything's possible.
You might have done a shin kick.
I've never done that before, but
You might have gone in with all the officers and all grabbed him.
any number of these is possible, I guess.
Okay. You didn't include any times in your narrative. Is that true?
In the narrative of the investigation, I have to look at it.
I can give you some examples,
Yes,
just
sir.
to remember. You know, when was he placed in the cell? When was he forcibly shoved in the wall? How long was that? When the medics were called? When Baker arrived at the hospital?
We did not do a timeline, if that's what you mean, no, sir.
How long these things took? You didn't do anything like that.
No, we did not do a timeline.
Couldn't that have been helpful in determining some of these facts?
It could have been.
You didn't put any analysis into the prisoner's medical condition about the pepper spray prior to the force being used in Los Angeles, is that true?
Can you repeat that, sir?
Yeah, you didn't include any analysis in your report about the prisoner's medical condition and the effect of the pepper spray on him prior to that forceful shove from Sanders, is that correct?
I believe there were sections that we discussed that
You didn't include the pepper spray SOG, did you?
into the police report. No, sir.
Into your investigative report?
No, sir.
And it's not even in your big investigative materials either.
Again, I would have to go through it
Don't you think that would be an important thing to look at?
as to,
As to the effects of pepper spray and what you're supposed to do when you're doing an investigation where someone's been pepper sprayed?
it might have been a good thing if, I would have to look at the ordinance at the policy at the time. That may have been one of those that was completely outdated at the time.
Rob Sanders never gave you an explanation why he didn't just bring Mr. Baker some water, did he?
No, sir, I don't believe that specific question was asked and or answered.
He never gave you an explanation why he didn't take him back out to the Sally Port and hose him off, did he?
That didn't happen very often, I can tell you that from personal experience.
But he had just done it that day,
Yes, sir, he did it.
so it does happen.
Yes, sir.
You interviewed Chad Craig, but he wasn't there when this happened, is that true?
Yes, sir.
And Chad Craig admitted to you that he helped Rob Sanders by reviewing his report with him, his police report, is that true?
I don't remember that, but it's possible.
And if that was true, it'd be in your materials, and you would, if it was in there, that was true.
If it's in there,
Yes.
I would assume, yes, it would be true. I don't remember that being specifically addressed though.
I'm sure I can be able to find it. I apologize. It's a very long report. I believe it is in there. I apologize for not having more. You recite Graham versus Connor, but you did not recite the SOG or the city's policies in your report, isn't that right? Because the SOG that he was charged with was not the one that you were actually looking at.
I believe we cited the use of force policy.
He one of the violations was 103.01.
Yes, sir.
But you spent almost all the time focusing on a different section on the use of force policy, isn't that true?
On page 2, I quoted 103.01, Code of Conduct. And then at the bottom, I began discussing General Order 103.06, which is use of force, and the policy on use of force.
Right, but those are two separate policies, isn't that true?
Well, they're all a part of section 103. But, yes, sir, one of them, the first 103.01 is Code of Conduct, and 103.06 is use of force.
And the only part of 103.6 that was an allegation was 103.68, is that true?
I would have to look at the notifications.
Was that right here?
There's General Order 103.01, Code of Conduct, duty to use reasonable force, CPD General Order 103.06,
And
use of force.
0.8, medical treatment.
Yes, sir.
That was the whole piece, that was the only subsection that there was an allegation, isn't that true?
Again, I would have to look at the notifications.
Okay, let me get them for you.
They'll probably be in this binder.
Okay, if you want to try to find them, we'll see if you can race there first. Here's the notification of findings.
Yes, so one of the allegations was 103.01, violation of the Code of Conduct, duty to use reasonable force, and then violation of General Order 103.06, use of force, medical attention. Yes, sir.
Thank you. And almost very, very little of your report focuses on abusive or improper treatment of prisoners, is that true?
Yes, I believe that's, by comparison, a smaller section. Yes, sir.
And that's because it's a city ordinance. Isn't that right?
Chapter 19, yes, sir.
Yes. So it's not something that, I guess, is really in your wheelhouse, is it?
Typically, it was one of those that you include in an investigation as a part of the procedure.
But it was a specific violation. Oh, okay, I don't need my fault. Okay, fair enough, I'll take the blame. It was a specific violation in this case, and when you interpret an ordinance, isn't it true that it's the normal common definition of abusive or improper, isn't that true?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
If you're trying to interpret an ordinance and the allegation is abusive or improper treatment of a prisoner, wouldn't you investigate anything that you thought was abusive?
Yes, sir.
Or anything that you thought was improper?
Yes, I suppose you would.
But your section on that is very tiny compared to the rest of your...
Compared to the use of force, it's definitely smaller.
In your report, you note on page 12 that Officer Sanders was quiet while he waited for Baker to bang on the door.
Yes, I believe he made a comment to the effect that he didn't want him to know that, didn't want them to know that he was outside the cell because he didn't want to agitate him further, something to that effect.
So you agree it's important to keep an agitated prisoner calm, right?
If you can.
But couldn't he have kept him calm like he did earlier in the day by just giving him some water?
I don't know if that would have kept him calm or not.
It did keep him calm earlier in the day, earlier that evening.
Seemingly, yes, sir.
For the video, do you remember the video showing the prisoner rubbing his eyes and returning to the sink again and again?
I believe I recall him rubbing his eyes. I don't know. I don't know how many times he returned to the sink. If it was repeated, if it was 2 times, I don't recall.
Prisoners and detainees were held for transport or interrogation or provided basic needs like water, isn't that correct?
Typically, yes, sir.
And the video shows that the prisoner only had like a single clump of paper towels, isn't that true?
I believe so. I believe the officers attempted to locate Sudocon wipes for Mr. Baker, but they weren't able to find it.
And the video also shows that Sanders removed the toilet paper from the cell, isn't that true?
Yes, sir. Let me back up. I don't recall that, but that would have been normal. We don't typically leave toilet paper in the cell unless they ask for it, because we have people that clog up the toilets constantly, or do other things.
There was nothing in your investigation that showed that Mr. Baker was trying to clog up the toilets, though?
No, I'm just saying as a matter of practice, we don't typically leave rolls of toilet paper in the toilets unless somebody asks for them. If somebody asks for toilet paper, by all means, we give it to them.